So let's go ahead and just start off briefly with your background. Maybe just tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so winding road to get where I am now. I my background originally was in kind of academic, like theoretical computer science research. So in undergrad I got really into like algorithms and theory and game theory and machine learning theory, and decided to do grad school on like diving deep into like game theory, machine learning, online learning algorithms, reinforcement learning algorithms, multi-agent systems. And so like I wrote papers about that kind of stuff for a while, and it was like very kind of heady and like formal. Lots of like theorems, almost no experiments. But I was also kind of like on the side in parallel doing some more industry work. I did a number of things both in the finance world as well as like kind of big tech stuff, of like applying reinforcement learning or applying generative modeling, um, for a kind of wide variety of different tasks, still in like the pre-LLM era.
Hmm.
And then kind of towards the end of grad school, I'd written some papers. I was like thinking of what I want to do after. And then this was kind of as like LLMs were kind of coming up on the horizon as like this thing. And they hadn't kind of come full circle with RL yet, to where we are now. But it was like I kind of had to make this choice of like, do I want to like go be a professor and like write theory papers for the rest of my life, or do I want to like go build something,
Hmm.
and like get my hands dirty? And it seemed like AI was happening now, like real AI, and that AI was LLMs. And I think the motivation for why I like got into the game theory stuff initially was AlphaGo in many ways and self-driving cars, and seeing that like, oh, we're gonna it's someday, we don't know what it's gonna look like yet, but it felt like around the corner were like massive multi-agent AI systems all learning in tandem and interacting with each other. That was like my kind of imagination in like 2017. And it was like it felt in 2017 it felt like far enough away that like doing theory made sense. And then in like 2022 it kind of seemed like doing theory didn't make as much sense because it was like happening now. And so I can go into like Morgan Stanley was something that I kind of did between the kind of towards the tail end of grad school. I was so the last section of grad school, I was at Morgan Stanley throughout that final year while kind of like patching up some papers for my thesis. Um, and then another year after that. Um, and that was kind of my pivot moment of like, it was a group that I'd kind of known about and had friends who had been involved there, former professors and colleagues and whatnot. And it was a group that was very much like in finance, but also like academics. It was very much like they like would publish papers, do a lot of like theory research, but also do applied ML. And it was like a small tight knit group that was I respected the people a lot, and so it was like kind of a place where I could go and do some theory stuff still, but also start doing other stuff. And it was my kind of entry point into LLMs, really, of like having that be a thing where I was like training stuff on GPUs and like playing with every new model that came out and like trying all the new tricks. And that's really where like I learned how to do LLM stuff was there.
Hmm. Awesome. So I guess like walking into some of your, your background even before you got to Morgan Stanley, you were at the University of Pennsylvania, obviously amazing school, along with Columbia for your PhD. Maybe tell us a little bit about that experience, sort of like, your experience, doing ML, both, in undergrad and grad school, actually working on research and sort of what you ended up specializing in.
Yeah, so I think like I've kind of been all over the spectrum from like super academic theoretical to like very applied. And I think like back in like the mid 2010s, like data science was the hot thing. Um, and like I knew I always wanted to do something like mathy, computer sciencey, and I came in for computer science. And originally, like everyone's talking about startups. Penn is a very like pre-professional school,
Hmm.
and so like the first week of college, you're going to like these big hackathons where it's like you learn about all the companies. Like you're 18 and you're learning like what Palantir is and Lyft and Snapchat and like all these things, and having this be like the corporate world you're imagining. And then as I did more programming, I kind of realized that I didn't like generic application building, software engineering all that much. I was much more interested in college in like my algorithms classes and my math classes. Um, and like machine learning and data science was kind of like the area to be able to blend those two. And so I did my first like did a couple software engineering internships. One of them, like I had the opportunity to like do some like data science work on the side that ended up like being part of a paper down the road. And I like really liked the algorithmic research process of that and working with data. And was like, okay, I want to do this. It's like maybe quant finance is the thing. Like maybe that's the right way to like do that. And then I did that. And I think that at the time, at like that summer, I was doing like kind of applied quant data engineering work. I really had an itch to go deeper on algorithms. The data science generic algorithms were like pretty boring. It was like there's more exciting stuff you could do, but to do that, you kind of got to go to grad school. And so I went to grad school and did the fun algorithm stuff for a while. And now we're at the point where real data science, real machine learning is the fun algorithm stuff. And so it's like the best of both worlds exists now in a way that it didn't back then. And so, yeah, been a lot of fun. Then like Columbia, I think, was really just like being in New York City was really great as a place to like, I don't know, think about these sorts of problems, like lots of stuff going on all the time, like lots of like tech things, but also finance things. Like I think the finance world is like underrated by a lot of like academics and tech people. They just think finance is boring, and it's like there's actually a lot of really cool problems in finance. It's just most of them can't talk about it because they're like at super secretive quant funds, and then like, but at banks and at like other kind of like more open institutions, you actually can like be a little more vocal about some of the stuff you do. And like back in like the 90s, there's this like whole history of like banks doing really great academic economics work. And so like a lot of the kind of foundational finance theory comes out of banks. So like if you go to like a MBA and you're taking like finance classes, a lot of these like papers you're going to be reading are coming out of banks and the research teams at banks. And I think the Morgan Stanley group is kind of like a modernized AI/ML version of that trend.
Absolutely. I think, critically, maybe we can touch upon three of your experiences before getting into Prime Intellect. So, you were at 2 Sigma, which is obviously an incredible quant firm where you were working on multi-agent RL. You were at AWS working on differential privacy for synthetic data generation. And then just broadly at Morgan Stanley, you were working on LLMs. So maybe just give us a little bit of, like what was the difference between these three? What are some skills that you feel like you had at all three? Obviously, 2 Sigma is a quant firm, so maybe you can't go into a ton of detail there. But to the extent that you're willing to, like, what do you feel like you learned?
Sure. Yeah. So one thing that like 2 Sigma like does make public that is like adjacent to what I was doing was they at the time they were doing all these like competitions for like Haylight was what it was called. It was like these like prediction games where people were like doing RL, and this was like Atari style RL, like you're doing PPO on these like tiny little models. And so I was working on stuff that kind of interfaced with that, and I got to kind of get my hands dirty with a bunch of different RL techniques that I'd kind of learned about in theory, but had not really like done at scale or anything before. And that was cool, but it was also still like 2019. So like stuff didn't really work that well. It wasn't broadly useful. Transformers had not propagated into the kind of mainstream. And I think what people in finance eventually realized, which is like basically public information now, my Morgan Stanley team like has published papers on this kind of stuff, is like transformers are actually pretty effective at sequence modeling. And so there is a lot of benefit from using like modern architectures for doing all sorts of forecasting problems. But I think for a while people were like, oh, it's going to be just like a big RL simulation. And I think like that never really like happened in what people were imagining. And then, sorry, the second part of your question was...
Yeah, so I mean, you spent some time at, sort of like 2 Sigma, AWS, Morgan Stanley.
Oh, AWS, yeah. Right. So that was kind of a kind of ongoing affiliation project research internship thing during grad school where I was working on like the differential privacy math interfaces a lot with the like machine learning theory math. It's like and a lot of the people who work in game theory also have a background in differential privacy for like kind of historical reasons. So it was like, but it was also like very it was like, I was doing like GAN stuff kind of, as well as like alternatives to GANs with kind of privacy as a focus, where the goal is just like make new data. And it was like, we weren't calling it generative AI at the time, but it was generative modeling. It was the sort of modeling where you're trying to kind of do unsupervised learning for distributions and like representation learning. And that was kind of like me kind of revisiting the applied world. And I think it was a good experience. I think it was good to kind of to see big tech. I think I eventually realized like research inside of a big tech company is not exactly what I want to be doing. I think that I wanted to do stuff where you have a little more independence and a little more ability to kind of run with some crazy ideas, which Morgan Stanley actually had a lot more like leeway towards because the research team was so small for such a big company. Like there were 20 of us as AI scientists there for a like 90,000 person company in total. And so it was like you could kind of just like pick a project and like go run with it. And I think that kind of mode of doing research is really what I enjoyed the most, is things where I can kind of take a project from start to finish and like work with the people along the way, but like have my piece of it that I have some ownership over and can like have this fit into a bigger puzzle where it's not like you're getting assigned little tasks to go do all day, and more of like getting to kind of have a research agenda of your own that you can shape.
Awesome. And maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about some of the research projects that you worked on, maybe some of the papers that you've written?
Sure, yeah. So one of the big projects so grad school, the projects that I did in grad school that were like the most kind of like core to what I was thinking about then were all the game theory ones. And so there's this one called Is Learning in Games Good for the Learners, which is like one of my fun ones with a couple friends. And that one's really about like the story of like meta game theory, like what happens when people are learning in a game, playing a repeated game and adapting their strategies, as well as like, okay, what if they think about their strategies of like this meta game, and what do the dynamics of that game look like, and what sorts of learning strategies or strategic choices about algorithm design make the most sense, and what are the trade-offs there, and like kind of mapping out the like information geometry of this problem. And so like, but that way of thinking about stuff, I think, is kind of like hinting at this question in my head, at least, of what's going on in multi-agent learning, like, which there is still no globally satisfying answer to. Because what we kind of are, I think a lot of people are like imagining, is that everyone's going to be having these AI systems that are like off learning stuff. And the stuff they're learning is a function of other agents who are also learning. And then this whole system is like evolving chaotically. And how do you like capture it in any formalism? How do you steer it? How do you describe it? And there is not a globally satisfying answer, but there are ways that you can like kind of twist and freeze the problem to make it so that you can describe versions of that problem. And so I'd say that was kind of like my meta agenda in grad school. And then Morgan Stanley, I think maybe the most interesting kind of research project was thinking about like scaling algorithms involving LLMs in the loop, where you're doing like graph-based analysis. So we did a lot of like knowledge graph work, actually, where like essentially you have all these databases that need to get like kind of organized together and like matched up, because you have all these different sources of information throughout companies and internal knowledge stores that do not all talk to each other the way that you'd want. And LLMs are like very useful for this. And so we kind of went deep on this project about using like graph algorithms in conjunction with like embedding models and LLMs for queries, as like kind of constructing these representations as knowledge graphs. And so that, I think, was kind of my like proto agent work, where it wasn't really like an agent, but it was like in the direction of it. And then also in parallel, we were doing like, I don't know, DPO fine tuning and stuff like that for, I don't know, summarizing financial documents. And what this kind of was, I think, building toward was like, okay, there's this like theory question I'd been thinking about for like since, I don't know, 2017. There were these new toys to play with LLMs and embedding models and agents. And then it seemed like just like the tail end of 2024 into 2025, these were finally kind of hitting a head where it's like, oh, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be agents, it's going to be LLMs, it's going to be RL, it's going to be multi-agent systems, and these things are all going to interact with each other. How do I do that? And so I'd say that's really like the arc I've been on, is like thinking about tool use, thinking about like kind of long horizon and agentic RL, and really just like building infrastructure for that and tools for that. And so like the Verifiers project was kind of started as like, I'd say that's like my most kind of important research project I've ever done, which it's there's no paper for it. It's just code. Right. But it was kind of realizing at the tail end of 2024 that like tool use RL was going to work. That it's just like pre-03, when 03 came out and deep research came out, I was like, yes. I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. And then like DPCR1 came out, and it's like, oh, now we're really gonna rip. Like it's time. And so I think that was a moment for me where I was like, okay, I'd had all these ideas in my head of like, oh, maybe it's gonna be like this, maybe it won't. I don't want to like kind of bet on it too much because it's risky to like go all in on something that might be a crazy idea. And I think like January 25, I was like, no, it's not a crazy idea. This is like the right thing to do. And so I just kind of like really focused on like doing the work.
All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and move on to Prime Intellect. Maybe tell us a little bit about sort of what motivated you to join and your experience thus far.
Yeah, so I think start of 2025, like I was saying, was this moment of like me realizing that I wanted to do basically, how do I go all in on this stuff? Like, how do I do this full time? And also, like, I was really enjoying doing open source work. And so I guess this is the tie-in, is like that. There's a couple open source projects that were like kind of me becoming more public over the course of 2024. This is like, I think after finishing grad school, I was like wanting to kind of be a little more visible online or vocal and like talk about my work. And so there's this, I wrote, like, curated a bunch of these like articles and blog posts into like a kind of mini textbook. I did some MLX work of like developing stuff for like running LLMs on MacBooks. And I was like playing with ArcAGI a lot. A bunch of these things just as like kind of different little side projects. And also just tweeting about it. And so the momentum of like being someone who was talking about the stuff kind of like I wasn't intending for it to like, I don't know, reach the point that it is now where it's like, I don't know, I have more followers than I ever planned on having. But it was a really fun outlet for me. And it was like the most fun I'd had in terms of like a public research community that I felt like was a better alternative to like the conference and like peer review system for me, at least. And so I was like, oh, this is what doing research for me looks like now. Like posting about experiments I'm doing and like talking to people and like going in Discord servers where people are like sharing tips. Like that felt like the research community to me. And so I wanted to do something that like I was kind of realizing that like I'd had a really great time at Morgan Stanley. I'd learned a lot. I really still liked everything everyone was doing there, but it was like I wanted to do LLMs, and it was a place where I was like one of a couple people working on LLMs for financial applications, and I wanted to like go do it in a more serious way, but also in a way that felt really fun and kind of true to the open source hacker spirit. And like I talked to a bunch of places, but it was like Prime Intellect was like pretty much obviously the right place to be. And it was also a place where like I think they were pretty open for me to just like kind of come in and do my thing and like have. I think there was like this stuff. I had a thing I basically wanted to do, which is kind of what I've been doing, and I was essentially looking for a place to do it. Of like what is the lab that is going to be like building really great open source infrastructure and training models, but also is like a real company, and a place where they're eager to have someone kind of come in and do like the agent environment stuff, and tweet about it all day. That was what I wanted to do. Prime Intellect was like, yes, come do it. And I was like, obvious choice, like no brainer. And it's been incredible. I've been having the time of my life. It's like, I don't know. I think like, I mean, I think every one of the companies, like people work really hard. People have a lot of fun. People are very talented. And I think we all kind of have this feeling of like, wow, we get to like do this stuff all day. This is pretty sick. And yeah, we're hiring. If people hear this and think that sounds fun, let me know. Yeah. And then the kind of what this has kind of been building towards for me, at least, has been like kind of my like focal point for the past couple of months has been this environment hub thing. So it's taking the like abstractions infrastructure I'd been building with Verifiers, as well as like the Prime RL stack that the team had been building for quite some time, for like making it really easy to scale distributed RL. Like basically, how do we make an experience for this for people? How do we make it really easy for people to use? And a story about like a frustration about the research community, and a joke I make a lot on Twitter is like, everyone wants to release their like every paper
Mm-hmm.
has to be a new unified framework. It
Mm-hmm.
has to be like soda novel breakthrough,
Of
and
course.
it's like, and what you end up with is, especially for like tool use RL, there are so many papers of tool use RL this year that are all like unmaintained Veril forks where they take ByteDance's Veril repo, they fork it, they hard code in some Wikipedia data set and a specific search tool or like some code executor, and they're like, oh, here's a new RL framework. And it's like, that's not a new RL framework. That's Veril that you hacked some stuff into.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sits there, and then they publish their paper, and then they forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the state of agentic RL research as of like the start of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, we have to do better than this. Like, how can we make this a fun experience for people, something that actually like can build and like allow people to contribute in a way that like is modular, it's following like good software practices. And so like I think the notion of the environment, the RL environment, has become like this like focal point of discourse. And it was like, okay, like how do we just do that really well? Like what is the experience for making an environment? What should that look like? How do we make it familiar to people the first time they use it? And like kind of intuitive. And I think in the spirit of like OpenAI Gym did this quite well back in 2016. And I think like that was kind of what we were shooting for, is like, what's the modern version of that? What's going to be the place where people discover these, or people like learn how to make them be able to quickly ramp up on research. And like maybe not every environment needs to be a paper. Maybe it's fine if an environment is 300 lines of code that you do it and you tweet about it, and then you make 10 more of them because it's like a homework project for your class, or because it's like a thing you're doing for fun on the weekend because you saw some video about it. Like that is kind of the community effect we were hoping to create. And I think that is still like my primary mission now, is like, how do we make this a really good community experience for people, something that people can like really enjoy and benefit from, that's also not a toy. Like it'll be a toy as you get started, but we also want it to be like real and the sort of thing that like is actually useful for like companies and like deploying. And so that's the design challenge we have been faced with, and seems like it's going somewhere. We'll see. Very early, but having a lot of fun with it.
Awesome. So, I mean, in Prime Intellect's blog, when they released, talking more about the Environments Hub, I think one thing that they sort of mentioned is that their like next step is to provide the full stack open AGI infrastructure. I think specifically they talked a little bit about, like how you guys have made a lot of progress on scaling agentic RL training to a bunch of really, really big model sizes. But there's a lot of really sort of crowded environments that are feeding into Intellect 3, for instance. And so, maybe in the future, as a result of all of these environments, you guys can train this like fully open, state-of-the-art agentic model. Maybe to the extent that you're able to tell us, just maybe walk us through a little bit of that vision and like how you guys hope to achieve it.
Yeah, so I think part of it, there's a paper we'll have out as a preprint within a couple of days about our RL stack. We've been working hard on like making sure that RL can both like scale really well, which to us means like multi-data center. We think the multi-data center regime is like both really underexplored and a really good opportunity to not just for like mega scales. Like the reason to do multi-data center is not because you've used up your first data center. It's because you want slices of many data centers. You don't need, like, you're still doing it on like kind of sensible numbers of GPUs, but imagine like if you can do RL training where like all your inference workers are like spot instances from whoever has spot available, like now this is like way cheaper and way more scalable if your infra is built in a way that's like kind of robust to the regime of not needing to be in a single data center. And so that's one of the one of our first priorities is like making sure things work really well in that regime, as well as that we can scale up to like thousands of steps. We can scale up to like 32B active parameters. We can scale up to mixture of expert models. We can like do this for agentic tasks where like our infrastructure has to be like, and part of this was like most trainers are built in a way where they don't actually expose like normal inference. And there are technical reasons why they do this, but a lot of them is like a tech debt reason, where this makes it really tricky to like build around, like have an application layer or like an environment layer. And so like I think one of the design choices, which feeds into the hub, which feeds into the whole stack, which feeds into kind of what we're going to build, is basically like saying OpenAI released a very good inference standard. Check completions is great. Completions is great. that is becoming the universal language for inference.
Mm-hmm.
Your RL trainer should use that same language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it should be normal. It should be the way people expect it. It should not be some random API that some PhD student came up with on a long weekend, like hacking together stuff for a paper submission. Like we need to have like kind of promises with software of like what to expect, what you can do, what you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the way that you allow like systems to be composable and modular and scalable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this disaggregation of like the environment logic from the trainer logic was a big piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this summer has been a lot of just like making sure that all these things work well.
Mm-hmm.
And that we can have infra that is going to be appropriate for those kinds of training jobs.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So, I mean, I think one other aspect of this is like kind of like we talked about earlier. You spent a lot of time, pushing some really, really great code to GitHub. I mean, both like the Environments Hub, but also, your Verifiers project. You want to maybe just talk a little bit about how they are similar, how they're different? It almost feels like it's a little bit of a continuation in some sense.
I mean, they're one and the same in some way.
Yeah.
Like, so Verify, to clarify, like,
Yep.
Verifiers is a library for building environments.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the kind of the SDK that you would use to write your environment.
Mm-hmm.
It has a trainer included, but the trainer is not the heart of the project. The heart of the project is the SDK for building environments.
Right.
And so what you get out of it, like if someone is working with Verifiers, what they're creating is a new Python project,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to have its own dependencies,
Mm-hmm.
its own folder that can live in any repo, and it's going to import verifiers, and they are going to use the components of verifiers to build an environment.
Mm-hmm.
If they do this, now this environment module is pluggable into any trainer that adopts the spec.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one that is included in the repo is an example of a trainer that adopts the spec. Prime RL is also an example of a trainer that adopts the spec. And we're like kind of talking to other people about like what it would look like to get these things supported.
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes down to, can your RL trainer expose a normal OpenAI API?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the challenge we're giving people is like, we're making all these great environments. If you want to use them, make your trainer support OpenAI completions.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do that, we'll work with you. If you don't want to do that, like we can talk to you about why we think you should do that and how to get around your like tech debt problems. But like really we think that like you kind of want a separation, and that the like that interface of like working with kind of a normal standard inference API is the way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hub behind the scenes looks like PyPy. So it's a package store. It's a wheel store for Python. And so when people are pushing to the hub, they are essentially bundling their project as a wheel and uploading it. And so like it's not intended to replace GitHub. It's intended to replace PyPy.
Mm-hmm.
And we imagine that a lot of people like will have to add some features for like kind of more collaborative development. But we're not like I think for like actively maintained ones, we still imagine that like the source code lives on GitHub. It's just that like the experience layer for like integrating with trainers and integrating with like displaying evaluations, we can do that ourselves in terms of like what we like are essentially building as like an evals platform and an environment discovery platform and a training platform.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I think, you sort of had a post earlier on Twitter just sort of about, your goal over like sort of like next few months and maybe kind of the mission that you had behind this product. And, I think you sort of talked about this concept of like tipping the scales of how like there's a lot of these startups that are now sort of emerging. I think you even mentioned like Mechanize, and how a lot of these startups, their goal is to like, sort of like be able to sell this ability almost like RL as a service or something similar. Maybe tell us a little bit more about like your mission here, like not just the mission behind joining Prime Intellect, which of course beyond the incredible founders, incredible team, and incredible sort of mission is probably something more. Like what do you sort of think is like your life's goal at this point?
I mean, there was this feeling that was setting in over the course of like 2023 of like, especially into 2024, like big models were getting great really fast, and open source models were kind of falling behind. And I was like, oh, this is kind of sad. Like, of course, most consumers are going to be using ChatGPT and stuff like that. But it seemed like it would be a sadder, darker world if we did not understand how the AI systems we are all interfacing with work. And that it was like kind of globally, socially important for the research community to not be fully locked behind closed doors in a couple companies. And it was sad to me whenever like a great researcher would like kind of take the vow of silence to never speak publicly about what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
to go join a big lab.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people were kind of doing this for understandable reasons, which is like, that's where the exciting stuff was happening, and there was no other real option. And so to me, tipping the scales means like making it so that there are other options, making it so that the choice for researchers doesn't have to be work on like crappy, boring stuff or be silent forever. Like, what does it look like for there to be structural advantages for open source? What does it look like for there to be like, and so what does structural advantages mean? I think a big part of that is network effect. So like, what does it mean? How you create like a system? And I think like there have been lots of really great examples of this with like MCP or like Hugging Face or GitHub, where like PyTorch, there are certain things that do reach this like tipping point where the being open source is kind of key to how a thing works. And models seemed like they weren't trending in that direction. And especially as RL was creeping up, it seemed like RL infrastructure and RL environments were not trending in that direction. And that the kind of default path is going to be, if you want to customize a model, you either just like fiddle with your prompt, or you go sign a big contract with OpenAI and have them customize a thing that's like super white glove for you, or you try to like build your own lab from scratch for your XYZ thing. And it seemed like none of these were really like ideal options for the outcome that seemed like the one you really want, which is like make it so like you have this abundance of ability to do AI stuff. And it is not all because the secrets are only at OpenAI or the secrets are like only at Anthropic. It's that like you're still like the capex is compute. You have to like pour compute into these things. You have to have a good idea of what you want it to do. You have to have good data. But the engine for making these things, the ability to on-ramp to start doing these things and have these things be on the table, like we wanted that to exist.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. So I guess, sort of moving forward, you've worked pretty extensively in RL environments, especially. Are there some sort of like other areas, I mean, maybe within RL that you're excited about? You've worked on verifiers. We've talked about some of the other things that you've worked on. Maybe anything else you want to touch upon?
Yeah, so one thing that I think is around the corner that I don't know what shape it'll take is memory. I think like currently memory is tool use for file systems. It's fine. Agentic RAG works, and so you can just say memory is an instance of agentic RAG. I think the tricky part is having models be good at knowing what to write, which I think this is actually like the lowest hanging fruit for like super long horizon RL is having models be good at knowing what to write and query from their own knowledge stores over a trajectory that is longer than their context length, which you can do research on by artificially shortening that. Like, I think part of this is we want to make it so that there are good research test beds so that like grad students can like go study this stuff at like accessible scales. And so that probably looks like, okay, what if you're going to have a model that's like, 3 active parameters, and it's going to be doing this over like a 16K or 8K length context and using its memory over this sort of regime. What are the like case studies? What are the like kind of hello worlds of this sort of thing? And that's one of those sort of things we would like hope to enable with having this like community platform for environments, is like having an environment be an encapsulation of like a discrete task you might want to do, which can be kind of isolated from needing to like rewrite your whole training infra for every single thing. And in some cases you'll need to, like certain algorithmic changes, you'll want to modify your trainer. But I think having like multiple entry points is really good for like on-ramping people. Right. And so I think we will like, I want to understand how memory works. And so it feels like the default path is that nobody understands how memory works, because OpenAI one day is like, hey, we solved it. Enjoy. Here's the chat interface. And everyone else is like, okay, how does it work? And they're like, oh, we can't say.
Right.
And it's like, let's just figure it out. Let's make it so we can have lots of people doing research on this stuff in a regime that is like faithful to like the actual real thing that is actually going to get deployed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, totally makes sense. I think the mission underpinning it is very real. So, one thing that's exciting is that NeurIPS 2025, you guys are going to be partnering with a multi-turn interaction LM workshop. You're going to be hosting, a reception there. Obviously, people can come see that. Any other ways that people should, get in contact with Prime Intellect, just apply on the website, DM you.
Discord. We got a Discord is
Mm-hmm.
popping now. We've
Mm-hmm.
like been it was kind of dormant for a while, and it's been the time to bring it back, especially with the environments hub.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I'm available on Twitter. Like
Mm-hmm.
I am gonna be pretty active, kind of answering people's questions and help people out. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my big goals now is just to make sure that people have a good time.
Right.
That the stuff we're building is fun for people. It's easy for them to understand. It's something where they have lots of examples to draw on, and that it's kind of welcoming. And so to me, victory looks like this stack becoming the default for a PhD student instead of fork and barrel. I think the way people have been doing stuff is a way that does not build the critical mass you want for maintaining this structural advantage of open source.
Yeah.
And I think having the ability to have this modularity, this interchangeability, this community, where people can kind of the environment is the contribution. It doesn't need to be the whole RL framework or whatever. It's
right.
Call the thing what it is. We have to kind of cut through the bullshit and be a little more honest with ourselves about what we're doing. Right. And I think that is what we're hoping to kind of enable and streamline.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, we're getting pretty close to the end of time. So maybe let's end with two questions. So number one, you've spent a lot of time teaching, both maybe throughout school, and I know it's also something that you care deeply about the future. Maybe just touch upon some of your background there and something that you're excited about. And then second, we just want to learn a little bit more about maybe advice you have to other researchers. Obviously there's now this push to open source things. GitHub's a large part of it. There's maybe some of these processes for selecting papers aren't maybe optimal. So just publishing blog posts. Is there any other advice you have for researchers and how they come up with research directions?
Yeah, so first one on teaching. I think I realized this. I'd always done public speaking stuff as
right.
in high school. And I liked it. And then I think in undergrad, I had some chances to be a TA in classes. And I really liked being a tutor and
right.
teaching office hours and giving lessons. And I think I've been kind of looking for different ways to do that. And I think just being online and doing these sort of things and talking to you and talking to people in Discord or in DMs is I think I've always really enjoyed this process of discussing these kinds of things with people. In terms of what to do and kind of advice, I think academia is great. You learn a lot by doing it, but it's not the only option. And I think people should here's one thing. I think a lot of people think about what paths have existed and what paths are ahead of them as oh, those are the options. The options are the things that the people, the generation before me also did. And it's the world's moving so fast.
Right.
There are no defaults anymore. There is no expectation anymore about what you should or shouldn't be doing. It's up to you to kind of decide what sort of stuff you want to do, how much risk you're willing to take on, how confident are you in your ability to do the things you want to do at a certain level, and what's the right mutual fit, what's the home for you to do the thing you want to do. And for some people that will be academia, for some people that will be joining a big tech company, for some people that will be joining a startup, or something else. I think especially in the startup ecosystem, and given how fast things are going, I think people should be careful about anything that wants to do it all. And I think the ecosystem benefit of everything working together is going to there will be companies that become the default for a thing, but I think AI is not going to be one company. It's not OpenAI is going to be the only person in the world, only company in the world doing any AI stuff. It's a new fundamental technology. And think about what piece of this do you want to work on? And for that piece of it, it's quite possible, quite likely that the right place to do it is going to be a place where that is the focus. And I think a lot of people should, you know, and I think that is a ecosystem where all these things can interoperate. Like, we don't want to we're not trying to do everything. We want to like pick our battles. We want to do like great RL infra. And then for other stuff, like, we're not going to make all the environments in-house. We don't want to be like churning out environments all day. We don't want to be building search engines. We don't want to be like, building an IDE. Like, we want to let people do that work. Let us do the thing that we want to do, and like all work together and like make great stuff and collaborate.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.